Wait till they get a load of me.
Matt from Infants on Thrones. I wanted to take a minute just to clarify a couple things that have come through and bubbled up through the comments. What anybody said, wrote, or thought is valid. Let me validate everything that was said, written, or thought.
I'm Batman! You sound like Cookie Monster.
Because you said it, you wrote it, or you thought it. And that's valid. So please, let me validate that. And let me state unequivocally, I respect the fact that you said it, you wrote it, or you thought it. I respect that very much. So let me validate and respect what you said. And I apologize that I didn't spend more time validating or respecting things that Bill said, because he said them, and they were valid. Because he said them.
Darling, I don't have to answer to you. I'm Batman.
Or something like that.
This is Infants on Thrones. The philosophies of men mingled with humor. We are the Quorum.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Osland, and this is part 2 of my PPI, which stands for Personal Priesthood Interview, which is something that we did as Mormons probably every 6 months or something. I don't know. It's tongue-in-cheek. So this is part 2 of the PPI with Matt Long, where we're going to find out about his enlightenment. That's going to be interesting. Just one thing of note, for those of you who are listening to this before Sunstone is in Phoenix, what is it, March 4th, 2018? Infants on Thrones will be there. Myself, Matt, Scott, and I think we'll have a special guest as well on our panel. And the theme is, if you could give advice to your younger self as you were entering your faith crisis, what would that advice be? What wisdom do you have to share with your younger self? So that'll be published as an episode, but if you're in the Phoenix area and you would like to check it out, go to Sunstone's website and find out what you need to do to get there. And if you go there, come up and say hi. We'll see you there. Now let's get back to Mattman. Mattman. Get it? Like Batman, but with an M.
To the Batmobile. Let's go. Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
It just can't be enough. Not if we're going to take away people's lives and put them in prison for a long time.
So I want to ask you about enlightenment now, Matt, because you mentioned that earlier, that losing your job puts you on a path to enlightenment. You've talked about kind of the professional change here. And you also kind of set up this pseudo-duality, compare and contrast structure when you were talking earlier about going through your faith crisis as you were a prosecutor, and you kind of kept those things separate. It was, one didn't really influence the other. I'm wondering, I guess, first, what you mean when you talk about enlightenment, and then I'm wondering, do you still have that compartmentalized with what you're professionally doing, or are they converging?
Well, the quick answer to that question, they're converging.
Yeah.
They've converged at a breakneck speed.
Yeah.
But being a defense attorney and coming to this realization that how vast the system problem is was an important step towards that.
And is that part of the enlightenment, part of that recognition?
I didn't think it was, but it absolutely was. Because as I was going through the process, I mean, I was in my angry atheist, Infants on Thrones, burn it to the damn, it was, there was, that was my spiritual approach to things. So they were still very separated, right? Work was work, and I fetishized the Constitution, due process, all those things. The things that I was experiencing was just confirming that. But spiritually, man, I was just like near nihilist, right? What's odd is I was doing defense work, I found humanity, and I found myself. And I started seeing all the people who are accused and defendants as people. and I saw them as flawed, and learned about their struggles, learned about their childhood, learned about, and at this point I'm not talking about sex cases in particular, I'm talking just generally, learned about, addiction struggles and poverty struggles and, every complexity that
all of the dominoes that fall down that impact where somebody is.
Yeah. And although I handled some sex cases, that's not the bulk of my defense work. It just isn't. And so in dealing with, almost my entire career as a prosecutor, I dealt with the worst of the worst. We're either talking the most serious of sex crimes or homicides. It's very easy to kind of treat things as black and white there. Mm-hmm. Most of my career as a defense attorney has been somebody who had a bad day.
Yeah.
Somebody who was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's not a bad person, but something bad happened, right? And it started becoming really frustrating to see the way the system loves to incarcerate, both before somebody's convicted and especially after somebody's convicted. And when I started dealing more with the less serious stuff maybe, but somebody who has done something wrong in the past and something, something kind of minor happens, to see these people going to prison for 5, 7, 10 years felt inappropriate. And it hurt my soul to see,
because you were used to these multiple life sentences, and then to see somebody go for like Jesus had a bad weekend kind of thing. Is that it wasn't long enough? It wasn't severe enough?
No, it was the opposite. So I'm telling you the opposite. I thought most cases people were going to prison for too long.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood that.
Because back when I handled kind of lower level crimes, I didn't think I thought prison was reserved for a certain class of person, right? But that's not what happens. So I see mothers taken away from their children for too long. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be some punishment. I'm not kumbaya, let everybody go. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying
I remember you telling me one about a mother that there was something like being home for Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up getting some press on it. Is that the judge specifically put her in jail over Christmas to punish her. And I kept saying, Judge, you're not punishing her. You're punishing victims. I'm sorry, you're punishing kids.
Yeah.
You're punishing kids who just want their mom for Christmas. Put her in prison put her in jail for a couple other days, another time. Do it during New Year's, which is a celebration and a drinking and let's make sure that she's not there drinking and doing these things. But Christmas?
Yeah.
But this is what this judge did, and I was angry at that. And that wasn't the only one. So here's the other thing.
Because you love kindness.
I started becoming the kinder, gentler.
Yeah, but like the peaceful warrior that's going to go out there and fight for kindness and justice.
Yeah,
which you would expect in the justice system.
You would like to see that, and it's not there. It's not there too often. The other thing I started representing was a certain type of sex offender. I represented kids, right? I represented 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds.
This was as a defense attorney?
And I happen to have a particular training in this. And one of the things that isn't well known is that, some people understand this, but there is a healthy sexual acting out. It's what a lot of people talk about, playing house and these types of things, right?
Playing doctor.
Playing doctor.
Like that.
Right. And I saw a number of these cases come through that they're not sex offenders. The conduct was what you would expect in a more healthy sexually development.
Can you give me some context? Because I'm struggling with the idea of defending children in a sex case if they're the victim. Like I could understand why you would be prosecuting somebody who
No, these aren't the victims. So you've got let's say you've got a brother who acts out sexually on a younger sister. Okay. So we could be talking about touching. In a couple instances that I'm talking about, we're talking about in like a looking and an over the clothes touching. Okay, 2 times over the clothes touching, and the age difference is within a couple years.
And what kind of, you're talking 10, 12?
Yeah, somewhere
13?
between like 11 and 9 is kind of the age range between family members. And as I look at it, you don't have any of those assaultive or grooming or threatening. You have one single incident, of that, and I represented a couple kids like that, and I saw the way that the prosecution, and probation treated these kids not just as sex offenders but as predators. And they started taking these 11, 12-year-old kids and putting them in this group therapy with a little older kids that had really committed serious offenses. And it's destroying these kids. And that was troubling. I didn't know that existed. I never did juvenile crimes. And so I'm going around getting the prosecutor's own experts that they use in trials all over the place, because these are my people. These are people that I know, and I know the science behind here, and I'm getting expert opinions, and I'm getting, I'm fighting for these kids saying, look, this is not a sex offender, but you're creating one. And I saw that, and it just killed me.
Do you flip it on the other side too and say this is not a victim of sexual crime, but you're creating it? Like you're creating more of a victim than he or she actually was?
Yes. Now, that's not to say that the behaviors weren't appropriate. That doesn't mean that
seems like such a tricky place to be.
Oh, but it requires such a delicate touch, and it requires confidence and knowledge.
Yeah.
In order to make that judgment call. It's easy to call any sexual acting out the most serious sex crime ever. It's easy to do that, and that's what our system has done.
Right, because you can say it's inappropriate.
Yeah,
and and it's issues. Wrong, and it's boundaries, and that's
that's right. And the psychologists and the people that
I feel like we need Bob right now.
That's what we need
to put some
give us
some radiation
on this. On. But the psychologists would offer reports and say these are psychologists who their job is to treat sex offenders. And I would get them offering opinions. I'd submit it to them. I wouldn't say, hey, I'm Matt Long. I know all this stuff. Don't you agree with this? I'd say, here's this case. Would you offer an opinion on it? I knew they would see what I saw, and they did. And they say, look, these are issues of, there could be impulse control, there could be boundary issues. Certainly we need to control that. They should not be, we don't want kids touching each other because of boundary issues, right? But that's different than being sexually motivated. These are complicated issues, right? But it requires, again, a little more parsing out. But I saw that, and I saw just the injustice of that, and what it was doing to kids. One of the kids that I represented had one bad day, and he certainly acted out sexually, and it's something that needed to be addressed, and it was. But there was a question of whether or not he should be register as a sex offender. Because that's the other thing with these kids. If they're forced to register as a sex offender for something that happened when they're 11 or 12, then they're registering until they're 25 in Arizona. And so I knew the significance and the impact of that consequence. And there were some kids, that just needed to happen, right, for protection and all these things. But there were too many kids where it just didn't. We demonstrated that those weren't the issues, right? There were, for this one kid that I represented, it was he had some emotional issues. He had some substance abuse issues. So that became he was convicted as a little kid. I don't want to say 12 or something like that, and 13, something like that. And he got to the point where he's 17, and he had done fine with treatment and those types of things, but he was having substance abuse issues, and he was acting out like at school. He wasn't, he was missing some school here and there. But when it comes to the sex stuff, nothing, right? No indication that there's any problem. In fact, there was indication, because he was getting treatment, that he didn't have those issues that you tend to see in repeat offenders and whatnot. Well, this judge was about to, one prosecutor was about to recommend registering as a sex offender until he's 25, simply because he didn't do well on the other aspects of probation. So they're using sex offender registration as a punishment that has nothing to do with sexual motivation. I got worked up, and I'm now using the same passion to scream against injustice to these kids, and in some cases these adults, I'll get there in a second, as I was for these victims, because I realized this system is failing these kids in the name of helping victims. But you're not. That's not helping victims. But they convince themselves that it is. And it's easy for Matt Long to say, I declare from on high, this is good, this is bad. And I get it, this is me saying it. And other people can disagree, but let's have that conversation. Anyone thinks I'm wrong about this, I'm happy to have that. But so far, I've had the fortune to be able to convince judges and other prosecutors that I actually do know that this is what it is. That I'm not just advocating because I'm a defense attorney. I'm advocating for principles. And the same principles that I advance in protecting victims are those principles that I advance in defending these guys. There are principles there. So let me give you another. So that kid, this is, again, one of the most satisfying things that happened is after he didn't, there's a kid who's just struggling, man, and the kid has no connection to basically adults, and after I, was able to very passionately argue, and I argued, again, not just because to do my job, but because I felt it, and he didn't have to register, and that kid just sobbed and fell into my arms when we got done. It was one of the more satisfying things. That was the right result. And I'll tell you about another case. I had a kid who molested his sister when he was 15 years old, and she was 5 years old. It was what we call one sexual episode, one event, 2 touches. Okay, it didn't come out until he was 19, and the prosecution starts, the investigation starts, and here's what happened. Right, he pleads guilty as an adult now, and now he's in the adult system. Okay, from 15 to 19, no acting out sexually with that victim or anyone else. How do you know, Matt? Well, I know. But I particularly know because he didn't act out on that victim that we know existed. We know he didn't act on that because of the interview techniques that were used. So we can know based on those techniques. And so this 19-year-old kid who 4 years ago molested his sister, who was much younger than her, that's a serious incident in and of itself because of the age difference, is prosecuted, and he goes on lifetime sex offender probation. This type of stuff is no joke. He's on probation for about 10 years, in and out of jail, picks up a substance abuse problem, picks up a new case, because of substance abuse. Again, in and out of jail.
What do you mean when you say picks up a new case?
Picks up a marijuana case because he starts using, right? So now you've got a convicted sex offender, right, with a prior, that now has a marijuana case.
Oh, like on his record is what you're saying.
A new case.
Okay.
And now we've got both of these, right, that he's dealing with.
Okay.
And he goes through this process of 10 years of violating probation and getting back on probation, but the violations are never for sexual related stuff. He's doing his treatment. He's got no issues, right, for 10 years, but he comes in and out and back and forth, right? 10 years later, the victim's an adult, and she wants to reunify with her family. The family did a great job of keeping them separated for all these years, missing every event, as should happen, right? But eventually, this girl wants a relationship with her brother because she's got to the point where she makes that decision. But the courts are keeping them separate, keeping these 2 adults separate, keeping this family apart. Because the system says this is what we do. Well, that guy's in prison now for 5 years because he was driving on a suspended license.
But all this other stuff was compounding the sentencing?
He was being punished for what he did when he was 15.
Yeah.
And so he was getting this prison sentence as an adult for something he did when he was 15. Had it come out when he was 15, he'd been dealt in the juvenile system. He wouldn't have done any prison. It would have been done. The system fails these kids, and in this case, I had a case.
So I've got to ask though, because
Yeah.
I'm sure some listeners will be wondering, why do you care about this piece of shit who did this to his little sister? He deserves what he gets. Why do you care about him?
He's a person, man.
Piece of shit person.
Yeah, I once thought that too.
Is this your enlightenment?
But he's a 15-year-old kid. Well, that's part of it. Because what I found in my life as I left prosecution, love. I found love for people. I found connection for other people, even flawed and pieces of shit as well. But this guy was easy, man. As I kept telling the judge, standing before you is a 15-year-old kid. This is a 15-year-old kid. And at some point, what I started seeing in all these people were broken kids. I was seeing these kids coming from poverty, from abusive situations, not having opportunities that a lot of us have. And I felt for them. I'd see them treated poorly by the system. So I sufficiently converted into defense attorney. Yeah. Oh, what I didn't mention is this time, the other piece that happened, leaving prosecution gave me an opportunity to think that now I can help victims, not just in the criminal justice system. I can use my skills and my tools to file civil cases, right? And victims came, right? I did that the Mormon Stories thing on victimology, because now I could finally talk about this stuff, because I wasn't bound by being a prosecutor and not talking publicly about these things, and that always constrained me.
Right, I remember, yeah.
And so I was like, oh, I'll do this. And as a result of that, so many victims.
Just make sure that the microphone's not.
Yeah, many victims came forward and they'd call seeking help, and and that was also enlightening in that I realized how few victims the legal system can help. Things like statute of limitations became huge barriers. Other legal issues that popped up, and we see that all the time as victims go around trying to find an attorney to represent them. And I took on cases just like I did as a prosecutor, cases that other attorneys wouldn't take. Old cases where the statute of limitations was barred, thinking I might be able to find something to make this case survive. And it was the worst thing I ever did. Because when I took on those cases, I thought I was giving those victims hope. But I wasn't. Well, I was. But what I gave them was false hope. My pie-in-the-sky Pollyanna view of the system, I can make a difference. I can work in the system. And what I learned really quickly is the system just isn't built to help victims.
Yeah.
It just isn't. And that was another form of conversion, I guess. Right?
And it seems that is kind of a consistent theme with enlightenment, and when people are learning to love, it's not about systems at all.
Yeah.
It's an individual relationship, and like the sense of compassion to, regardless of whatever system you're in.
Yeah.
To like reach out and embrace, heal.
Yeah. Wanting to see. I have spent my life, my adult life, mired in other people's trauma. Talk about trauma, trauma by proxy or proxy by trauma, whatever. And it got to a point where I just wanted to see more healing.
Yeah.
Rather than trauma. And my process that started with breaking down the system that's not just the Mormon church, but then the system that's religion. And then breaking down this system that's prosecution. And then seeing the system generally, the criminal justice system, and breaking that down and seeing that as being flawed. And then going further and seeing the entire legal system and seeing how inadequate that is in most people's lives. And I look back on all of my cases and all the different situations that I have and seen how the one consistency was the system failing people. Not just victims, but particularly victims, but also those who are accused. And as a result of that, the accused family, the victims' families, and that ripple effect. So the injustice that happens as a result of that flawed system to victims, defendants, also causes trauma, collateral damage to those loved ones who are necessarily brought into the system because of the act of somebody doing something wrong, or a case being brought.
Do you have a different take on this? I'm going to scripture mastery you.
Oh, geez.
Matthew 22:21.
No. What is it?
Well, you're Matthew. So Jesus said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's."
Yes. I started saying that all the time. But I felt so conflicted because my lifeblood was beholden to Caesar.
Right.
And so much of my time, energy, mental energy was for Caesar, right, rather than God. But absolutely, I started doing that and seeing the things that matter, the things of the heart.
Yeah.
Those were godly, right? Those were, and these Caesar things, man, you just have to.
You got to do what you got to do with them, but you put your focus on those things that are compassion.
Yeah. And one of the things I started doing was just showing compassion and talking to people, but defendants. And what my job, what I started doing was really just making sure they understand the reality of things. Because what I learned in talking to especially defendants is they believe the system's fair. And the thing that makes it so difficult for those who are accused is this ought to be different. I ought to be treated different. But I'm not. And so a lot of my job just started being communicating the reality of the system to them.
Well, you have to be able to see that there's a difference between the things that are Caesar's and the things that are God's, or compassion, or love, or whatever you want to say, if you don't want to talk about it as God. That if you're under this belief that it's all just this one system, and that becomes your religion, like you said, that it became your religion. That part of your enlightenment was seeing the distinction between those two things and realizing that the entire time what was drawing you to it was your compassion. It was that desire. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. And what I'm thinking about is, in many ways, it was the breaking down of the system that made me kind of rediscover Jesus.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because you were separating the two things.
And I was very, very much so thinking about the things that Jesus taught, not just about the Caesar, but just, whether it be the kingdom of heaven is among you, and, love one another, and, all these things was just like, that really rings true to me, and that's not happening here. Right. So that conflict was definitely happening. But the breakdown of systems that started with the church and has continued until fairly recently, because as somebody who was born in the system and brought up in the system, I was taught to believe in the system and to fight within the system, because that's where my skills were. And it made me think, my gosh, what do I do if all of what I've been trained to do is to work in the system, and I don't believe in the system? And I think the system has failed. What do I do with these tools?
Yeah, I see it a little bit different. Like when you say that you don't believe in the system, and this might be me getting a little bit too pedantic over words, so I apologize in advance. But I think it's an important way to see it for me is that you believed that the system was more than it is.
Yes,
and
that's
so then you had to kind of.
I was Pollyanna when it came to the system.
Yeah,
very. Summer child, child of the summer, whatever, the Game of Thrones. I just very much had a Pollyanna view of what the system was, and when it became something different, again, very much like the church. Of course, this is what the church is. It's all good and roses, and
right.
It was the same thing over and over and over.
And you go through that process of deconstruction, and then put it back together, see the things, because of course there's value in the system or we wouldn't have a system in the first place, but the things that you really want to do are outside the system, and you can. And that's where you're leaning now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's not like you're ditching the system, but you're allowing the system to do those basic things that the system does, but not have it be like this unrealistic, all things for all people kind of system.
Yeah.
I'm probably not saying that.
No. So two things. So the first thing is, I am very comfortably a defense attorney now because of how problematic I see the system for everyone. So it's very easy for me to defend those who are accused. And it's something that I do see as being pretty virtuous. And in really, the cliche of speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
This is a way to speak truth to power. But especially recently, and I've become really comfortable in my role there, and I'm going to continue defending people because I feel strongly that police ought to do better, that prosecutors ought to do better, and that they ought to wield their power more judiciously, and that they oughtn't be politically driven. And the more I see that happening, and that's happened throughout my career, is that there was once more of a separation there was more of a check and balance between prosecutor offices and law enforcement. Over the years, there's become this marriage politically, philosophically. So the prosecutor now becomes a rubber stamp for law enforcement rather than checking the power of the law enforcement. And that's scary.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing it. And that's another reason why I'm so comfortably a defense attorney. The more that good prosecutors and thoughtful prosecutors leave, and what's grown up in that is these automatons.
Yeah, okay.
That love being told what to do and just following policy. They're not thinkers. They're not, a skilled attorney takes seemingly similar facts and finds distinguishing characteristics. That's gone. And so now it's a lot more about ego, winning, and the real
how much of it is the CYA cover your ass stuff too?
So it's there's I don't know if there's much of that. Here's this comes to a new enlightenment or a new awakening, I guess, is the realization and the true understanding that the criminal justice system is built to convict the obviously guilty. They convict those who make it easy on the system. Law enforcement, prosecutor, government agencies generally have not enough resources, not enough people, and too much work. They're like that bear that's in a river trying to catch salmon, right? Think of all the salmon that get past that bear. They're going to look for the biggest or the easiest, right? And so that's what they do, and that's what they take. And that's law enforcement, and that's prosecutor offices. They let maybe a lot of worthy salmon going through them, going past them, and they get the easy one. And then they hold up the easy one and say, "Look what a great fisherman I am." Meanwhile, they've let all the fish go by.
You mean Fisher Bear?
Fisher Bear.
Look what a great Fisher Bear I am.
What a Fisher Bear, yeah. Or let's say it's a man, whatever. But yeah, that was, and that's the reality of it. That's the practicality of it, and I certainly understand it. But when you leave prosecutors to their own discretion to make those calls, they tend to go towards the easiest and maybe not the most worthy. So I started seeing situations where, these backpackers, that's someone who's bringing marijuana across on their backs, right?
Yeah.
For the cartels. These people are not criminals. These people are not drug dealers, and they're not drug smugglers. They happen to be smuggling drugs on one day. But these are people who are trying to get in the country, yes, illegally. And they show up and they paid $2,000 in order to get transport across the border. And when they get there, there's a person with a gun who says, carry that backpack. They're forced into it. So rather than just trying to come across for their family, they're now drug smugglers. And what I've seen is law enforcement who collects these smugglers, right, have 15 bales of marijuana, and then they beat themselves on the chest saying, we took down 15 drug smugglers, these drug dealers who are bringing it. You didn't do dick. You got 15 innocent people who aren't criminals, who had a really bad day and was forced into a situation. But they pound their chest, look at the fish I caught. And I saw that, and it hurt my soul. It hurt my soul for these people that I've never met and I've never seen and will never speak to again, but just knew those are wasted resources, and those are not the people we need to get. If you want to go after the cartel members, go after the cartel members. And we know who the cartel members are because they're the drivers, they're the people with the cell phones, there's the people that are directing things. And those people were getting the same plea offers as this other dude who did not have that same connection to the cartels, because it takes a lot of work to build a case against a cartel member. You actually have to do a trial on that. And why do that when we can instead sell the public on a fiction and justify the money and the politics and all these things? So I saw that.
So what's the solution, Matt?
The solution?
Yeah.
There is no solution, homie.
No, come on. You're moving towards like healthy places. Let's hear about that.
All right. So I'm comfortably a defense attorney. I'm going to continue to defend people because of how strongly I feel the system is broken. But what's been killing me is what I'm seeing happening with victims, because those same fish, those same salmon, they also represent victims. And just like the system is built to get the most easily got dudes, that applies to sex crimes. And so as a result of that, the realization that the criminal justice system and the legal justice system generally is just simply not built to help victims for a lot of reasons. The first and foremost is that's not the type of evidence that the criminal justice support, right? Secret things that happen in secret places that don't leave evidence, that don't leave physical evidence, right? So right from jump, we're starting from a handicap, essentially, right, when it comes to these cases. Now, most of these cases happen really, or get disclosed and come in very late. That puts us even more behind the eight ball, right, not being able to meet these cases. And then you have the challenging things that are associated with it as well. And so not only do most victims not report, most victims who don't report never get to see sometimes never get to see a police officer, or never get to see a courtroom, because it's never going anywhere, because the system itself is not built to handle these cases. And that was killing me. Because, again, my job, I thought, was being able to communicate to juries how the real world works, how victims are respond and how they're treated and what happens to them and how these offenses were committed. But yet, as I'm doing defense work and doing civil work, I've got all these victims coming in, and now it's even worse than when I was a prosecutor, because I'm being laid all this trauma on my lap, and there's no mechanism to deal with it. There's never going to be a court hearing, and as an attorney, I can do nothing for them. But maybe that's not true.
Because that's in the system. You're saying that the system doesn't allow you to do anything for them.
That's right. In the system, I can't do anything for them.
You can't do what it is that you're intuitively feeling like you want to do for them.
Yeah, because what I want to do for them is heal them.
Yeah.
I don't want to heal them.
You want them to be healed.
I want them to be healed.
Right.
And as I go around and I'm talking
you want to help it as much as you possibly can through education, helping them understand what are your.
Well, so I had this. So I'll tell you this. As this is going on, I started seeking enlightenment. I wanted religion, right?
You want someone to preach to you?
Someone to preach to me. The philosophies and
there will be many with humor.
Yes. And I did find a bit of religion. Nah, that's not right. I found some spirituality. And I found spirituality in love and in connection. And that opened up the compassion that I had, and it awakened, I guess, some motivation to help victims. And something came to me. And what came to me is I've been educating and trying to educate the wrong people all this time. Because as I'd get information from these kids and from these victims, I was doing it in order to try to build a case, in order to communicate to other people, this is how the real world works. This is what happens when victims are victimized. This is how they respond. This is the trauma that they experience, to get juries to care in order to either convict or protect this victim. That's what I was doing in representing these victims. But what I wasn't doing was helping the victims realize that. And so as I knew these victims were experiencing things like shame, shared responsibility, guilt, doubt, not being believed, fear, all these things that victims experience, I could explain to juries why that's expected and why that happens and what happened by the offender and the victim's response to cause that. But what I wasn't doing is telling the victims that. So a few weeks ago, I decided maybe I could do that. Because I was done with Infants on Thrones about a couple weeks. I've been done a number of times, haven't I?
Yes.
I've told Glenn I've quit.
Silent, not as publicly as Randy used to when we'd make fun of Randy's last episode. But yeah, you've been kind of like.
And part of my awakening,
but in a lot of that, I mean, just from me witnessing it, has been, does my voice, do words even make a difference?
Yes, and that,
just like talking about stuff, I don't want to just talk in an echo chamber.
Well, I started feeling some things very strongly. I'd say love, right? And I started becoming very content with kind of where I was with just understanding the universe, right? I was resolving some things with the religion. I was feeling ex-Mormon and just really being done with that. And as a result of that, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. And I didn't even want to talk about spirituality or religion or these types of things anymore because you
didn't want to preach at people. You didn't want to say you should do this or like all these things.
So one of the things I really did is I became connected to Joseph Smith. I really had an understanding of Joseph Smith, right? And the insight that I had was that Joseph Smith was close. That when he went to the Grove and had that transcendent experience with God, right? That he came back and he had this idea, right? Two things. The first one is there are no creeds, and he preached that. And that really resonated with me. Is there shouldn't be creeds or dogmas or shoulds, and meaning you should do this. This is what you should do to attain enlightenment. And the corollary to that, I think, was everybody can approach God directly and receive revelation for themselves. I think those two things go together. Is that you don't need dogmas, you don't need creeds, because everybody has a right to approach God directly. And that was really resonating with me as I was kind of going through my own process and trying to get away from, I've been joking about, I don't need a life coach or a prophet or anything like that, as I just need me, right? And that was really resonating with me. But the other thing that I was thinking about with Joseph Smith was he comes back and he told his mother, none of the religions are true. No religion is true. And I think where he went wrong is he stepped in and he thought, so I will fill that void. I will create the true religion. And I think that's where the error really, really happened. I think we can demonstrate that. But I resonated with the idea of no religion being true, but I put a different spin on it, which was there is no truth in religion. And that seems like a bold statement. And what I mean by that is there's a spiritual feeling, there's a concept, there's this idea that people feel. And then once I gave voice to it, I felt like I was losing.
Like it was slipping away.
Yeah.
It just brought confusion.
Yeah, and I felt like once you give language to a spiritual feeling, you create religion. And that's when I started getting away with talking about language and saying, talking about these things are just ineffective for me.
Like, or like understanding something with your intellect is great, but it's with your gut, it's with your feelings. That's where like all the real stuff happens.
Yeah, and I really started kind of being conscious of my own intuition and just having this gut feeling about things and feeling really comfortable about that,
right.
But not wanting to go further and say, I have this gut feeling about this thing, and you should too.
Right. Yeah. And here's what you need to do to get to where I am and be me.
Yes.
Yeah.
You also should be like me, and so what you should do is listen to this music, wear these clothes.
No one should enforce one thing, but you all should be like me.
I believe in no creeds, no dogmas, except for
mine.
But if you want to really get there, this is what you should do. Yeah.
Right.
And so instead I said, look, I'm done talking about these things. I'm done. But I had this real awakening that I do have some things to say. I have some things to say towards victims. And I think that there's some education that can be done that's kind of tied to this intuition. And I was bouncing around this idea of it's a silly it's not real great, but the idea of a forensic based approach to intuitive healing, right? And by that I meant I have talked to so many victims over my career and over my life, really. I mean, dude, I get calls all the time. I get messages all the time. I'm a veritable John DeLynn of victims when it comes to like he is with ex-Mormons. I spend time on the phone so much, sacrificing my time and energy so that I can talk to victims. And you don't even know the amount of time and energy. Was that
No, it sounds like you're a big fan of John DeLynn.
A big fan.
Yeah.
Big fan. Yeah. Once. But I did. I spent so much time talking to these victims and hearing their stories, but really ultimately basically telling them, yeah, there's nothing I can do with you as an attorney. I approached it as an attorney, saying, yeah, I can't help you. Here's why that case isn't going anywhere. And I constantly threw cold water in these victims' faces. When they were just coming to me, wanting to tell their story, wanting somebody who understood to hear them.
Yeah.
And so I started shifting. And instead of saying, well, let's take this from a legal approach, instead I started telling victims about the system and why the system fails victims and why the system might not be the best place for them. But then I started just talking to them and telling them about all victims. And what I found is when I did that, it gave them a voice because they knew these things. They knew why they kept quiet. They knew why the way that they felt when this guy did these things. They understood freezing. They understood disassociation. They understood why when they first started to tell, they gave just a little bit to see what that reaction would be. And then based on the reaction, how that person reacted, how they maybe gave a little more, or maybe they had to retrench. They knew that. They just didn't know they knew it because they didn't have the language for it. And that's when I started finding power in words and power in the language that I was using to juries all those times and providing that language to victims. Not so I could tell them, let me hear about your case, and let me tell you what you experienced, and let me tell you what happened. Instead, I just talked about my kids and what I saw them experience. And as I started doing that, I saw these victims, now survivors, putting the pieces together themselves, intuitively healing themselves.
Is it also a situation where with the power of words, it's also an economy of words? So you spend time telling them what they need to hear, but then mostly listening and allowing them to intuitively, what you were saying, intuitively tell their stories and intuitively heal.
And they start piecing the piece. So I'll give a principle about of something, and then they will say, "This happened to me," And now I don't have to say, yeah, that's what this is, because they get it now.
So you teach them righteous principles and you let them govern themselves. Yeah.
and the other thing, that this whole non-creed, non-dogma thing was really, really, really important to realize, to get to this place, because as much as all victims respond similarly, and these things are through lines in every case, each victim is an individual and experience them individually. And that's why it's difficult to say, you need to know this. These principles are applied in unique ways, right? For some person, for one victim, there might be gifts or a feeling of being special to that person that kept them quiet. For another, it might be threats or fear that their family will be destroyed if they tell, right? The point is there was something that was put on that child that forced them to feel, and I say forced them, this wasn't their own doing, that they couldn't tell. And it's that impact of not telling that contributes to the shared responsibility. They do the same, I should have. But instead, I think with these principles, they can hear, you had no choice to. We tell victims too often, it's not your fault. It comes from a good place, right? It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's the goodwill hunting. I like the goodwill hunting. I always say, I'm going to goodwill hunting you, right? Robin Williams goes to the man, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. And then he breaks down, and that's the breakthrough. Well, I think that's bullshit, because these victims have heard over and over and over again, it's not your fault. What I think this information can give them is the realization in themselves, it wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
And now I know why. And I feel strongly that if they have these tools and if they come to this realization, I'm not saying that it's an end-all be-all and that all curing, all healing happens there, but it might be, and I think it is, a piece in order to help facilitate healing. And that this information, with some counseling and some other things that are out there, other resources, can go a long ways towards healing. I think it can give victims a voice, so that but now the voice that I'm talking about isn't a voice to go talk to people and say necessarily, this happened to me and I want everybody to know. The voice that I want to give them is that internal voice. It wasn't your fault, and you're okay. And
ultimately, the internal voice that says, I love you.
Yes.
I love me.
I love me.
I am worthy.
Another thing that...
I'm pure.
Yes. I am worthy. Another thing that has really bubbled up here is that can be difficult for people outside to really understand, is this conflict of loving the abuser and hating the abuse. And so I've seen these from both sides. And so to one of these kids I was talking, I say kids because I feel like I'm always talking to kids, because at some level these adults are still experiencing the trauma that they experienced as a kid. So I'm talking to this kid that experienced
the kid
it. So
in them,
the kid in him.
Yeah.
I was talking to this person, and I said, look, you're probably sick of people calling, this person in your life who abused you a piece of shit, a monster, evil, all these things. And she said, yeah, because I loved him and I love him still. I said, no, I know that. And that's, you should. Maybe you share DNA with that person. Maybe these are complicated issues. And so I tell them, you have the ability to love this very, very flawed person. But it seems so difficult to love yourself because you're flawed. I want you to apply that same, hopefully you get to a point where you apply that same love to that flawed person to yourself. I think calling these offenders sometimes a piece of shit, a scumbag, and all these things, it might be helpful for some people. And when that's needed, I'll do that. Even if I don't feel that way, because the reality is, I don't think they're all pieces of shit. And I don't think they're all evil, and I don't think they're all monsters. Even though they caused immense trauma and pain to these people. Because those victims don't think that. Many victims don't. So what I want to start doing is giving victims a voice.
And you're talking about like finding people with different specialties and expertise to, you know, like you're not going to do it all. You're going to find people that actually, like therapists and...
Well, at some point, but right now, I'm putting a call out to victims who want to have their voice their voice heard and have their story heard. I think what I want to do is hear their story and give them some principles. Rather than...
And you want to share that with as many people as you can.
Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of victims out there that want their voice and their story heard. But not just to have their story heard, to say, please believe me, right? Or I should be believed, because they should be believed. But I think we can explain how that story explains how the real world works. And that can communicate not just to that victim. Sorry, I use victim all the time because that's how I was trained to do it. You know, survivor, all these things, I should be better at that. I'm not. So I always use the term victim, but that's not to be disparaging. You know, I think these victims can heal from that, from doing that, and by coming to getting some of this information and hearing these principles and why they behaved the way they did and why the offender behaved the way they did. You know, another quick example, the idea of selection, being a target child. Why was I abused and my other siblings weren't? That's a question a lot of people have. I think we have the answers for that. And that's something that can be helpful. But again, not just to give them a voice, the individual, and to help them heal, but in giving that victim a voice, that causes a ripple effect to have other victims who hear their story reinforce the idea of me too. But Me Too is an important movement, and it has been an important movement. It continues to be an important movement because it highlights just how pervasive a problem it is. But I think the problem that it highlights is just how flawed these systems are that we rely on in helping and protecting these victims. Because the systems aren't built for these victims. But the Me Too program, the Me Too movement certainly highlighted that. But I think there's another step that can be taken, is that we can take Me Too, provide a little bit of information, so that we move from Me Too to Not You. The more people that come forward and understand these things, the more principles that we can teach and have people understand, that might be another victim that doesn't feel that same shared responsibility, blame, doubt, insecurities, fear. And maybe they tell. Maybe they don't. And we'll have more people to heal. People got to heal, man. Mm-hmm. We're treating symptoms too often. Mm-hmm. We're treating symptoms of depression, anxiety, bulimia, sexual acting out, all these things that come in because these kids are still trying to process what happened, and why it happened, and why they reacted the way they did. We have the answers for those. That's what I want to do, dude.
All right. Is there a place people can contact you if they're interested in helping you or being a part, or even if they're a victim and they want to talk with you?
Yeah. I don't know. I should set up an email.
Yes, Matt. Email's a really cool new thing. You should check it out. It can be really helpful. You can reach Matt at this email address, mslonglaw@gmail.com. That stands for Matt. Scott is his middle name. MS. Long is his last name. LONG. Then the word law. All run together. mslonglaw@gmail.com. You'll also find that posted on our website associated with this episode. Thanks again for listening to this episode. More PPIs coming up. And come support us on Patreon. We'd love for you to support us on Patreon. You should come over to Patreon. Hey, I got an idea.
Pretty bird, pretty bird. Hey, this is Billy in 4C from Rhode Island. Yes, that's right. The blind kid from Dumb and Dumber, and now Dumb and Dumber 2, too. Yes, a pseudo-celebrity Mormon. Infants on Thrones has helped me come to grips with the tragedy that I've seen. Well, heard about at least, when learning that the thing that mattered most to me ended up being dead all along. I mean, Petey didn't even have a head. If you heart the show as much as I do, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. Write a short review, and oh my heck, why not post about it on the social media? Unless you're still stuck in the Relief Society closet about your faith transition stuff like I am. And always remember, I just thought he was real quiet. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.